Welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Today we're going to dive into the world of wealth creation and breaking the cycle of poverty. Joining me is Tom Corley, who's dedicated his career to understanding the behaviours that separate the rich and the poor. According to Tom's research, only 4% of people born into poverty manage to become rich. Now that's a shocking statistic. So I guess the question is, why is it so hard to break free? What are those habits holding people back? And most importantly, what can be changed? So Tom's going to be joining us to answer all those questions, and we're going to discuss the habits, the mindsets that contribute to poverty, the role of knowledge and mentorship, and how to overcome the limiting beliefs that keep people stuck. Now, no matter where you are in your wealth journey, I'm sure my chat with Tom will be of benefit to you. And of course, you know he's my co-author in the international best-selling book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits. So whether you're struggling to make ends meet or simply looking to build your wealth even further, hey, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Today I want to ask the question, why is it so hard for the poor to become rich? I recently read an article which stated that only 4% of the poor actually make it to the other side of the wealth gap. But why is that number so low? What's holding people back? To help us unpack this issue, I'm joined by Tom Corley, who's dedicated years to studying the habits and the beliefs of the rich and the poor, and he's written a number of books about this, including one we've co-authored, the international bestseller, Rich Habits, Poor Habits. So wherever you are in your wealth journey, you're going to be in a treat, as I always learn something from my chats with Tom. Hi, Tom. Good to catch up with you again.
Hey, Michael. How you doing, my friend?
Well, you've done a lot of study on the rich and the poor. And yeah, good. Thanks, Tom. I've been well. It's been a little while since we've caught up. But I found fascinating your study that only 4% of the poor actually become rich. That's a pretty striking statistic. Why is that number so low? What does it mean for somebody who's trying to climb up the ladder?
And this is in America. This came from the Pew Charitable Trust Report of 2013. I didn't have data on this because, I already had the poor people as a group. They were poor. And I had the rich people as a group, and they were rich. So I didn't have data on, how many of the poor people became rich, except out of the wealthy people in my study, 41% of them had come from poverty. So I said, you could say, well, 41% come from poverty, and that's not accurate. I knew that wasn't a right statistic because I'm interviewing millionaires. I'm not interviewing the entire population of people.
Yes.
So I said, I've got to really nail this down. So I started doing a lot of research on this. And I finally, after about 6 months, I found an article from Pew Charitable Trust Report, and they said 4% of the poor become rich, and 17% of the poor rise to the middle class. So 70% of the poor remain poor, and I was shocked by that. But my house, we came from poverty, we rose to the middle class, so I guess we're the upper middle class. So we're part of that 17%. And scratching at the wealthy status. So, maybe in a year or 2 or 3, I'll be in the wealthy status. And now the new data on that, to be part of the wealthy 10% in America, you have to have 3 million. So they're closing in on my 3.2 million that I used in my study. That's it. That's the facts. And so the real question is why?
Yes,
right,
yes. Now, the fact that a small group actually do become wealthy should encourage all those. You came from poverty. My parents came as migrants with nothing. 3 generations lived in the same house, and they were workers, and I've worked my way up. My parents grew to middle class, and I assume I'm in the rich category now. So it is possible, but let's understand why it's not working for some people.
Well, there's a number of reasons, and one of them I agree with, even though it's like a talking point for the politicians, but it's the exploitation by the wealthy. And what happens, but what the politicians fail to share with you is that it's the exploitation by the wealthy of the politicians. And so the politicians will advance legislation that favors the rich and just ignore the poor. So the poor are on their own. The other thing is unfair taxation. One of the things we have in America is we have something called Social Security tax. We have Social Security benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, and 7.65% of the first dollar that you make as a poor person, it goes to the government. And that's the problem. I think that the Social Security needs to be reformed. And so there's unfair taxation there. There should be some bar where, they don't have to pay that tax for the first, say 40,000.
Well, in Australia, there is no such tax. It seems silly giving people who need benefits to take some of it back. In Australia, though, we're not providing anywhere near enough social housing. There will always be disenfranchised people. There will always be people who need help because of mental health issues, drug issues, other issues. And I believe it's our responsibility as a community to support them. Having said that, our government's not doing that right either. So apart from that, though, I know you spend a lot of time looking at habits. Would you say that one of the reasons the poor remain poor is because of the habits that they've learned from their parents and their peers?
Yeah. And one of the habits that they never really pick up is the habit of self-education. Education in and of itself, formal education, is very important. That lifts a lot of people out of poverty. But self-education, that's the education that you engage in on the side, extracurricular activity. I do it in the morning. It's usually 2 hours, just to try and educate myself on all sorts of different topics that relate to what I do for a living and my research. So I think self-education, I would say, is the number one way for poor people to escape poverty, and they just don't do it. And as proof of concept, when I originally wrote my initial book, Rich Habits, I targeted the poor population, and I had to shift my marketing strategy because none of the poor bought my book. It was only the middle class, upper middle class, and the rich people that bought my book, Rich Habits. So it's just a sad testament that being in poverty is that it's not a big priority. And I also think that in poor communities, there aren't as many wealthy, successful people, right? So who are your mentors? If you don't have any of those people, you have no success mentors, nobody to latch onto that you could maybe help you escape by teaching you some of the habits, like learning to read every day, 30 minutes or more for self-education. One of the other habits is building relationships with other successful people or success-minded people. Well, there's a paucity of a poverty of those people in poor neighborhoods, so it's kind of hard to do. So I think probably the number one escape route for poor people would be reading to learn.
Well, you don't have to buy books. There's everything available free on the internet, but I guess they scroll through TikTok and Instagram. We've often mentioned that your thoughts lead to your feelings lead to your actions, and your actions lead to your result. So your inside world affects the outside world. But I've found a lot of poor people feel like a victim. They let the outside world affect the way they think, which then affects the way they act. And it's almost a self-fulfilling cycle of doom and misery, as opposed to working the other way around and having positive thoughts and positive habits, Tom.
Yeah, I agree. I think that probably the negative mindset, which playing victim, is living in the world of negativity. That basically says you're saying to the universe, I have no control over my life. And the universe is a very, complicated, quantum-based thing. And our brains are quantum computers. They're not just, organic. They're quantum-based. They're proving that. The neurons, they believe now, are little quantum computing devices. And so... and they believe the universe operates that way. So when you're throwing out negative things into the universe, well, the universe is going to send back more negativity because that's how quantum mechanics works, quantum computing works. It gives you more of what you're throwing out there. If you're throwing out positive vibes, positivity, I can be whoever I want to be. I just have to work hard enough, that kind of thing. The universe is going to reward you with positive things in your life. So you got to get rid of that victim mindset, that persecution mindset, that hopelessness mindset. And it's easier said than done, Michael. I grew up in poverty. I know exactly what they're going through. I felt hopeless, and I couldn't even afford college. I had to work as a janitor, but I had locked it in my head that I was going to fight my way and climb my way out of this poverty. I wasn't going to be one of the statistics.
Well, it's also said that you become like the people you hang around with the most. So if all your friends are feeling the same, feeling out of control, not reading the right things, spending time doing things that are not enhancing you, it's actually very hard to break through that cycle, isn't it?
It is. And the sad thing is that typically, the people that you associate with are other poor people who share your negativity and your limiting beliefs, and just reinforce that. So everybody's in lockstep. Hey, yeah, the government's screwing us, the rich people are screwing us, or Wall Street's screwing us. They all blame all these outside parties, when in fact the world is your oyster. All you got to do is change your mindset.
Very much so. So you've got to feel like you're the pilot of your life, not a passenger being dragged along. I can understand how it's hard to break the cycle. What would you suggest to somebody who's in that mindset, that framework at the moment? How do they get out of that cycle of, it's virtually self-fulfilling, because I've never seen a rich or successful victim.
Yeah. Well, the answer is it's impossible without self-awareness.
Yes.
And that's why my first rich habit number one, is the self-awareness rich habit. You have to become aware of the habits that you have, the people that you associate with. You have to become aware of your thinking, your limiting beliefs. You're not, the reality is, Michael, that's why the percentage of poor people who become rich is so low, 4%, is they lack self-awareness. And how do you jumpstart someone? How do you get them to start to be self-aware of their thinking, their beliefs, and their habits? And to be honest with you, that's been my mission, and that's what I've been doing since 2010. Really, I've been trying to get as much media exposure as I can, and I do as much with social media as I can. My hope is that, and I do get emails from people who are poor, who are following my rich habits. And I had one woman from another country who was able to save $600 based on my, my research and my advice. She followed one of the rich habits, and she saved not a lot of money, but $600. And her child, her 5-year-old child, came down with brain cancer, and in that country, $600 saved that child's life. So she wrote me an email and said, "It helped me save my child's life. She would have died, like most of them do. They die in whatever country, I can't remember. But that was profound to me. And I said, well, I guess I'm getting through. But I really think that I could do a lot more. I could maybe, and I've tried this. I went to about 40 schools in poor districts in 2012 to do speaking gigs. And it was disappointing for me, because out of the 40 or 50 kids in the class, 2 or 3 would come up and want to talk to me. The rest they couldn't wait to get out of there. So I don't know. I think it's, unfortunately, I think it's, the parenting and your upbringing limits your ability. And people like you and me can only do so much.
I guess one of the other things is the concept we've spoken before about, and that of delayed gratification. Now, this wasn't in your article, but I was just thinking about it as we spoke. I'm going to leave a link to your article in the show note about this. But I think a lot of the poor people are living for the here and now. They actually don't have a long-term focus, Tom.
No, and part of the reason for that is they just want to escape their lives. So they're looking for entertainment or anything on the internet that's going to allow them to live in some type of fantasy world or a different world that doesn't remind them of the world that they're currently living in. That's why so many of them are, addicted to TikTok. and it's a good and bad thing. And I see a lot of my research, even though I'm not promoting it, I'm not doing anything to create that content. I see a lot of it trickling into TikTok from other people, and so I think that's you have to, in my opinion, you have to find those escape hatches that the poor people are using. And, I'm not going to go and speak at a bar, right? But, I've thought about going to prisons, talking to prisoners who are going to get out at some point. And, I've got a captive audience, so to speak. And I've thought seriously, really hard about that. And I actually reached out to 2 prisons in New Jersey back in 2014, but they weren't interested. I kept at it, but they just weren't interested. And I think it's because I wasn't famous. If I was famous, they would have me come in just like Johnny Cash was able to sing inside the prison.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's that thing.
Now,
hey,
we're not belittling the challenges that poor people have. We're not saying it's as easy as all that either. I mean, they've got things stacked against them. There's a great wealth transfer occurring as baby boomers die off, and they're passing on huge amounts of wealth to the next generation. In Australia, it's suggested over the next decade it's going to be something like 4.9 trillion. Where you are in the United States, I've read there's $72 trillion worth of assets that the baby boomers are sitting on at the moment that are going to pass on to the millennials some days. Here already in Australia, Tom, their parents are giving money to their kids, their grandkids, to help them get into the housing market, while the poorer people are having real difficulty with the cost of living crisis we're currently experiencing, Tom.
Yeah, it's really what, the government's only going to do so much, Michael. It's really up to people like you and me and successful people, wealthy people who can, through their wealth and through their knowledge, can help the poor people that want to be helped, And so I think,
do they want to be helped? I'm sorry, and I'm going to offend somebody asking this question.
Yes, they do want to be helped. They just don't know what they don't know. They don't want. I mean, they have dreams, and their dreams are not to be poor. So they do want to escape it. They just they're locked in a system that doesn't have a lot of resources. Doesn't have Tom Corleys and Michael Yardneys sitting in their living room telling them every day, "This is what you need to do to be successful."
Well, in your book, Rich Habits, and you've written a number of books, and the one together we've written, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, has become an international bestseller, translated into lots of countries, including poorer countries. So clearly the local publishers recognise the need to educate people, and boys, it's selling very well overseas. And hey, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't got a copy of it yet, you can get it online, you can get it on Kindle and in any of the digital versions, or go to richhabitspoorhabits.com and get your own copy of the book. But Tom, in your studies, you've written about the various habits people have, and in the particular article I'm quoting where you said that only 4% of the poor people become rich, you quoted that there were 300 different behavioural habits of the rich compared to the poor. Now, you didn't say what they all were, but what are the main different habits, just to give people a hint at where they should be placing their focus?
Yeah, so the number one difference in terms of percentage, I think it's 88% of the wealthy read 30 minutes or more every day, and only about 3% of the poor did that. Interesting, that's 3%, so those 3% are probably going to escape poverty.
And they read for education rather than entertainment, I think would be a fair thing to say.
Right, yeah, that's right. They didn't read to escape, they read to learn. So that was like the number one habit. Pursuing dreams and building goals around those dreams. I call it dream setting. That was another habit that the rich had that the poor just didn't have. The other thing is the poor people, they don't have the ability, because there's lack of opportunity in the places where they live, to really intern. One of the things that I found in the wealthy people is that they hooked on to mentors, and interning is one way to find mentors. So it's the poor people just didn't have mentors. They didn't have mentorships. There was some organizations like Big Brother in the United States that they tried to do that. And George Foreman, who was a famous boxer, he actually built an entire facility to help poor people escape poverty. He was teaching them not only boxing, but how to be a good person and how to be a responsible person and a disciplined person. And so I think a lot of those things, if you have discipline, if you read, if you build habits like reading to learn, exercising every day, which helps build your brain, helps build your mind. And the thing about that's so important is in the poor households, because there's so much stress, that actually I have studies in my study binder that show conclusively that poor people's brains are smaller than other people because the stress has a negative impact on the brain and how the neurons forge connections. So there's actually part of the prefrontal lobe that is smaller in poor people than it is on everybody else. And the only way to expand that prefrontal lobe is through exercise and reading. Some of these things, these habits that I talk about, the rich habits versus the poor habits, don't watch as much TV. Don't spend as much time on TikTok. Shift your focus over the things that are going to help you grow. I call them growth habits. Poor people don't have growth habits. They need to grow and improve, not only mentally, but physically, and grow your relationships. Forge relationships with people that are outside your comfort zone, which is other poor people is your comfort zone. Try and find them. Where are they? I'll tell you where they are. They're on board of directors of nonprofits, and a lot of those nonprofits are involved in poor communities. So I would tell a poor person, if they say, well, there's no rich people in my community, there's no mentors, I say, you're absolutely 100% wrong. Find one of the nonprofits.
So what you're calling a nonprofit in Australia, we're calling a charity, but we're saying the same thing. I agree with you.
Yes.
Now, again, I remember reading something that Warren Buffett said, and the fact that one of his greatest advantages of where he was born and the time he was born. I guess if he would have been born in Africa 100 years ago, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to be able to be such a great investor. But the majority of people listening to this podcast are going to be in Australia and the United States and in European areas where they've got the opportunity for jobs and good economic conditions. There's no doubt that in some parts of the world that's just not there. There's too much corruption and not the job opportunities. But you mentioned a bit about stress a moment ago, Tom. Health issues can be both a cause and an effect of poverty. Poor health can limit your ability to work, get lower income. Conversely, limited healthcare, nutrition, food can lead to health problems. So I could see that being an issue if you don't have enough money.
Yeah, it is. And we have so many fast food restaurants. Australia does too. I know because I've been there. There's so many fast food restaurants out there, and they're high calories, low nutrition, and they actually impair your health. Now, the calories keep you alive, but meanwhile, you're clogging your arteries and causing diabetes and all sorts of high blood pressure and other bad negative things. That junk food, Michael, is also an escape. It's a way for poor people to have some pleasure in their life. Because let's face it, my favorite number one food in the world is White Castle hamburgers. I don't eat it that often, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, but it's junk food that I love. Now, if I was poor, because it's inexpensive, I could be eating that 2 or 3 times a week, right? So that would make me probably another 30 pounds overweight. So it's one of these things that poor people use as an escape, and alcohol is another one. And I can say, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that, but I understand where they're coming from. We had it in my family because we were poor. You had all these things. You ate junk food. You drank too much alcohol because they were a way for you to escape your poverty momentarily. So,
well, we're not belittling or judging people for being rich or poor when we're using these words. It's really just discussing where you are. Everyone, in my mind, and I know you think similarly, everyone's very important. There's somebody's mother, brother, father, sister. So we're hoping to educate people to get to the next level. I think it was Bill Gates that said, if you're born poor, it's not your fault, but if you die poor, it is your fault. So we're just trying through our podcasts, our blogs, your books, my books, to help educate people. So I hope we've stimulated our listeners today to explore more. I'm going to leave a link to your Rich Habits website where people can subscribe to your daily musings. Every day you send something out to help us think about how we can get better control of our life, how we can get better habits. I know you're very active on social media as well. And I look forward to catching up with you again in a month's time to have a bit of a further talk about these topics. Thanks for your time, Tom.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Tom Corley. He's a fountain of information about the psychology of success. And if you've been following my podcast, well, we give you a lot of information, hard data, facts and evidence. We also spend time talking about the psychology of success because in my mind, that's the big difference between successful investors and the average Australian, the way they think, the habits that they've got. And that's, I guess, one of the reasons Tom and my book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, has become an international bestseller and translated into 7 languages. By the way, if you don't currently subscribe to this show, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on YouTube or listening to it in a podcast app, just stop for a second and subscribe. Maybe it'd be nice to leave us a review as well. But that way you're going to get the information my guests and I bring you twice a week. And as I said, the psychology is important. Being positive, being comfortable, hearing the bad news is one of the reasons some people are very successful in business, in property, in life in general, because there's lots of negative news. The economy, the political problems, financial challenges, the world keeps throwing that at us. And that's worrying many would-be home buyers and property investors. And sometimes the good news is drowned out, the fact that the property market just keeps rising and has done since the beginning of 2023. So my suggestion is don't worry about where interest rates are going to be in 3 months or 6 months' time. Don't worry about what's going to happen to an upcoming election coming. Have a think about where our housing markets are going to be in 5 or 10 years' time, considering the considerable strong population growth, the rising economy, the fact that our economy is going to keep doing well, despite all the challenges thrown at it, despite the fact that we've got a great knowledge-based society that's earning more income, and there's all these immigrants coming in aspirationally wanting to buy homes, all that's going to underpin rentals and property values. So be encouraged where our housing market's going to be in 5 or 10 years' time. And if you're interested in getting investing to take advantage of this, or buying a new home before FOMO drives the herd back into the market, have a chat with my team at Metropole. Have a talk with one of our wealth strategists to discuss your options, because we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through building substantial property portfolios. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but we're small enough to care. So have an obligation-free chat with one of our wealth strategists, metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to share a list of things with you that you'll regret in the future if you don't do now. Now, I talk a lot about money and property in these podcasts, but when you get to know me, you'll realise that I believe true wealth is what you're left with after they take all your money away. Sure, money's important in some aspects of your life, but it's not important in others. So these 12 things that I'm going to discuss with you, I think are just important as money and will help you enjoy the journey. If you don't enjoy the journey to your final destination, you're not going to enjoy the destination. So the first thing I'd like to remind you is to put your health and your wellness above everything else. Look, there's an old saying, if you don't have your health, you've got nothing. And this is very true, isn't it? Boys that have been brought home over the last year or two, what's the use of having all the money if you're in one of those countries at the moment where you're stuck indoors with COVID, or you're even worse in hospital? The other lesson I'd like to show you is take time to do things you love. Now, I know it might sound cliche, but work a little bit less and play a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying don't work hard. You're not going to get anywhere if you don't work hard, but you're never going to regret taking a vacation or engaging in a new hobby or spending a day with those who make you happy, because there has to be a balance. There's always going to be more work to do, so balance your life and enjoy it. The third lesson I'd like to share with you along this theme is stop taking life so seriously. Why are you taking life so seriously anyway? Why are you worrying about all those things? Because remember, most of the things we worry about never happen, or if they do happen, they're not as serious as we thought they're going to be, and down the track, I don't know, in 2 years, in 2 days, they're not going to be as important as they seem to you today. So stop taking life so seriously. The fourth lesson I'd like to share with you is always say what you need to say. If you love somebody, tell them. If somebody hurt you, tell them. If you've got trouble expressing your feelings, sure, you can write a letter or write an email, but that's not the way to do it. Make sure those around you know each and every day how you feel. Another lesson I'd like to share with you is open your mind to possibilities. This is one of the things I share with people in my mentorship program, that they really should reach for the stars. If they don't do it and only get to the moon, that's no problem. But there's always ways of doing things. Open your mind to possibilities. The sixth of the 12 little life lessons I'd like to share with you today is follow your own path. Live a life true to you. Stop comparing yourself to others. Stop striving for perfection. Stop living a life based on expectation of others. This has obviously been made worse by social media over the years, where everyone shows you what they bought for lunch, what they ate, what they dressed, all the things that look good, sound good, but you don't see all the stories behind it. I mean, look at Melinda and Bill Gates, who recently divorced, and everyone thought, gee, they were happy, and look at the billions of dollars they've got. So follow your own path, live a life that's true to you. The seventh lesson is stop living in the past. Right now, you need to throw away the regrets of the past. It's gone. There's no point dwelling on what could have been. Doing so is only going to rob you of the present moment of joy. The past doesn't exist other than as a memory. It's a mental story and it can't be changed. So don't live in the past. What happened, happened. Move on to the future. Now, the eighth little lesson is accept things you can't change. I mean, there are some things you can't change. So rather than being upset by them, worrying about them, being concerned, work on the things you can change, things you've got control over, and don't get upset by the things you can't control, accept things you can't change. Another of these little life messages, lessons I'd like to leave you with is practice mindful living. Mindful living will slow down time. It will enhance the present moment. It'll fill otherwise mundane days with awe and joy. So pay attention to what you're doing. When you're there, be there. In other words, if you're with your kids or your friends, don't have the phone on. Don't look at Instagram or Facebook. Practice mindful living. Another little hint is stop chasing money, fame and possessions. Now, we crave wealth. We want prestige. We want fame. We want popularity. We're normal. We're human. We crave material things and beautiful people. And we mistakenly think happiness is going to arrive when we get these goals. My suggestion to you is instead enjoy your life. If you're constantly in pursuit of something other than where you are right now, you're not going to be enjoying the experience. And at the end of the life, your expensive BMW won't be what's flashing in your mind. You'll more likely be smiling at the memory of, your loyal dog. So stop chasing material possessions. There's no real happiness there, only an endless pursuit. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't be building an asset base to protect your future, but I'm suggesting put it all in perspective. The 11th lesson I'd like to remind you of is always practice gratitude. If you're not grateful, you won't ever be rich. We know all those rich people we've heard the stories of rich people who are miserable. They're sour. They don't appreciate what they've got. You're living in the best country in the world at the best time in history. Appreciate it. And the last of these 12 little things I'd like to talk to you about today that I believe are going to be important and you'll regret in the future if you don't concentrate them on them today is the message of love. Pay attention to all the sources of love in your life. And you're going to develop a growing sense of abundance. You're going to see beauty around you each day. You're going to be optimistic rather than pessimistic. So there you have it. A list of 12 just little independent, random thoughts, a list of things that I think you'll regret in the future if you don't do them now. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?